Few television dramas have managed to embed themselves into popular memory with the same endurance as Little House on the Prairie. Airing from 1974 to 1983, the series became a defining piece of American family television, blending frontier hardship with intimate domestic storytelling. Set largely in the fictional town of Walnut Grove, it followed the Ingalls family as they navigated poverty, community struggles, and moral dilemmas in the late 19th century American Midwest. At its heart was Michael Landon, who played Charles Ingalls, alongside Melissa Gilbert as Laura Ingalls, a character based on the writings of Laura Ingalls Wilder. The show's appeal lay not in spectacle, but in its emotional sincerity. Each episode often functioned as a self-contained moral story about resilience, empathy, and endurance. Yet beneath its gentle tone, the series frequently explored difficult realities such as poverty, prejudice, illness, and loss. Over nearly a decade on air, it evolved from a modest frontier drama into a cultural landmark, remembered not just for its wholesome imagery but for its willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about human life. From memoir to television, the literary roots and casting vision, the foundation of Little House on the Prairie came from the autobiographical books of Laura Ingalls Wilder, which chronicled her childhood experiences on the American frontier. Translating those books into a serialized television format required both expansion and reinterpretation, shaping historical memoir into episodic drama. The creative team, including producer Ed Friendly, envisioned a series that could balance historical authenticity with accessible family storytelling. Casting became crucial to that vision. Michael Landon was not only cast as Charles Ingalls but also became the creative engine behind much of the show's direction, while Melissa Gilbert brought depth and emotional growth to Laura Ingalls, evolving from childhood innocence into complex adolescence across the series. Karen Grassel, portraying Caroline Ingalls, added grounding warmth and maternal strength. Together, the ensemble formed a believable frontier family whose relationships felt lived in rather than performed. This careful casting, combined with the adaptation of Wilder's material, transformed the series into something larger than its source, a dramatized meditation on family, survival, and moral development in a harsh but hopeful world. Walnut Grove as a living world of community and struggle. At the center of the show's enduring appeal was the fictional town of Walnut Grove, Minnesota, which functioned as more than just a backdrop. It was a living ecosystem of interconnected lives. The town represented a microcosm of frontier America, where every character, from shopkeepers to teachers, contributed to a shared sense of community survival. The Ingalls family's farm sat on the outskirts, but their lives were deeply tied to the rhythms and struggles of town life. Storylines often revolved around collective challenges such as crop failures, school disputes, or moral conflicts that required communal resolution. The schoolhouse, church, and mercantile were not just sets but symbolic anchors of stability in an unpredictable world. This immersive environment allowed viewers to feel emotionally invested in Walnut Grove as if it were a real place. The show's structure encouraged familiarity, with recurring characters evolving over time, creating a sense of generational continuity. That emotional realism is part of why audiences came to regard the series less as fiction and more as a remembered shared experience. Michael Landon's creative control and storytelling philosophy. One of the defining forces behind the series was the extraordinary level of creative control exercised by Michael Landon. As star, writer, director, and executive producer, he shaped nearly every aspect of production. His storytelling philosophy emphasized emotional clarity, moral resolution, and character-driven conflict. Episodes often centered on ethical dilemmas that resolved with lessons about compassion, forgiveness, or perseverance. This approach gave the series its distinctive tone, sentimental without being superficial, and dramatic without becoming cynical. However, such centralized control also meant that creative disagreements were inevitable. Some collaborators felt that Landon's vision left limited room for alternative interpretations or shared authorship. Still, his influence ensured tonal consistency across nearly a decade of episodes, making the series instantly recognizable. He also pushed the show to address topics that were unconventional for family television at the time, reinforcing its reputation for emotional courage. Whether directing a quiet family scene or a dramatic crisis, Landon's presence shaped the series into a deeply personal project that reflected his values as much as Wilder's historical inspiration, confronting social issues through frontier storytelling. While often remembered for its warmth, Little House on the Prairie was notable for its willingness to address serious social issues rarely depicted in family programming of its era. Episodes explored racism, disability, addiction, poverty, and illness with surprising directness. Storylines such as The Blind School or The Lord is My Shepherd challenged viewers to confront prejudice and empathy in ways that were unusual for 1970s television. The show used its historical setting not to escape modern problems, but to reflect them through a different lens. This allowed difficult subjects to be approached with emotional distance while still retaining impact. The frontier environment amplified these themes, showing how isolation and hardship intensified moral decisions. Characters were often placed in situations where compassion conflicted with fear or misunderstanding, forcing resolution through emotional growth rather than external intervention. These narratives contributed to the show's reputation as more than entertainment. It became a platform for moral storytelling that encouraged reflection on contemporary social values. Behind the scenes, tensions and creative friction. Despite its on-screen harmony, production was not without internal conflict. Relationships among cast and crew were sometimes strained by financial disputes, creative differences, and the pressures of long-term production. Karen Grassel, who played Caroline Ingalls, was among those who reportedly experienced disagreements over compensation and professional recognition. The intense production schedule, combined with the emotional demands of the material, contributed to fatigue and occasional friction among cast members. Producer Ed Friendly also experienced creative disagreements during the early development of the series, particularly as the tone evolved under increasing influence from Michael Landon. While many of these tensions never fully disrupted production, they shaped the working environment behind the scenes. Over time, the series became as much about managing creative control as it was about storytelling. Yet despite these challenges, the cast maintained a professional commitment to the show's vision, allowing it to continue for nearly a decade without losing its core identity. Personal relationships, scandal, and emotional fallout. The personal life of Michael Landon became a subject of public attention, particularly his relationship with makeup artist Cindy Clerico during his marriage. This situation created emotional strain among cast members, especially those who had viewed Landon as a mentor or father figure. Melissa Gilbert, in particular, experienced a rupture in her relationship with him, as she had long considered him a guiding presence both on and off set. These interpersonal dynamics added emotional complexity to the production environment, blending real-life relationships with fictional family portrayals. While the series maintained its on-screen warmth, the off-screen realities were more complicated, marked by shifting loyalties and personal reevaluations. Over time, some of these relationships were repaired, but not without lasting impact. The emotional weight of these experiences contributed to the bittersweet atmosphere surrounding the show's later years, reinforcing the idea that even idealized worlds like Walnut Grove were not immune to real human conflict, declining ratings, and the decision to end an era. By the early 1980s, Little House on the Prairie was facing declining viewership as television audiences shifted toward newer formats and genres. The network, NBC, began reassessing the show's viability within its evolving programming strategy. After nearly a decade on air, the series had naturally reached a point where narrative arcs were concluding and audience interest was dispersing. Rather than being abruptly canceled mid-story, the decision was made to conclude the series through a set of television films that would provide closure. This approach allowed the creative team, particularly Michael Landon, to design an ending that felt definitive rather than abruptly imposed. The transition from weekly episodes to television movies marked the end of an era, but it also provided an opportunity to craft a final statement about the world of Walnut Grove. The conclusion would ultimately take shape in a dramatic and symbolic finale that has remained one of television's most discussed endings: the destruction of Walnut Grove and the power of finality. The concluding television films culminated in a dramatic narrative centered on the fate of Walnut Grove itself. Facing a powerful land developer intent on taking control of the town, the residents ultimately choose to destroy their own home rather than allow it to be consumed or repurposed. In the story, the townspeople use explosives to demolish key structures such as the schoolhouse, church, and mercantile. The sequence became iconic not only for its emotional weight but for its visual finality. In production terms, the destruction involved practical effects and the deliberate dismantling of constructed sets, giving the moment a tangible sense of closure. The decision, driven by Michael Landon, reflected a desire to ensure that Walnut Grove would not be reused or reinterpreted after the series ended. While rumors later exaggerated aspects of the event, its symbolic meaning remained clear. The story was being closed permanently, on its own terms, with no possibility of continuation. Legacy, myth, and the enduring memory of a television world. In the decades since its conclusion, Little House on the Prairie has remained a subject of nostalgia, analysis, and reinterpretation. Syndication introduced new generations to its episodes, although later programming often favored lighter installments over more emotionally intense ones. Over time, myths and misconceptions developed around its finale, particularly regarding the destruction of Walnut Grove, which some viewers mistakenly believed had been banned or suppressed. In reality, the episodes continued to circulate widely, becoming part of television history rather than disappearing from it. The show's legacy endures because it balanced simplicity with emotional complexity, offering stories that were accessible yet thematically rich. It demonstrated that family television could address serious issues without losing its sense of hope. Ultimately, the series remains remembered not only for its depiction of frontier life, but for its willingness to explore the full range of human experience: joy, hardship, loss, and resilience, within a single, carefully constructed world that still resonates decades later. Top of form, why the show still resonates across generations and changing television landscapes. The enduring appeal of Little House on the Prairie lies in how it continues to speak to audiences long after the frontier era it depicts, and even long after the television era that produced it. Modern viewers encounter the series in a very different media landscape, shaped by streaming platforms, serialized prestige dramas, and faster narrative pacing, yet the emotional core of the show still registers. Its focus on family, moral choice, and community responsibility feels almost countercultural today, where television often prioritizes irony, complexity, or moral ambiguity over straightforward emotional resolution. The performances of Melissa Gilbert and Michael Landon remain central to this longevity, as their portrayals of Laura and Charles Ingalls create a sense of authenticity that transcends period setting. Even its more sentimental moments gain strength from sincerity rather than cynicism. At the same time, the show's willingness to confront difficult topics, while still resolving them within hopeful frameworks, gives it a balance that many contemporary series struggle to replicate. Viewers revisiting Walnut Grove often find themselves responding not just to nostalgia, but to a structured vision of community life that feels increasingly rare. In that sense, the series persists, not as a relic of 1970s television, but as a continuing reference point for how storytelling can combine emotional clarity with social reflection. Bottom of form,